of, Orion on the horizon. The Apollo 12 landing site sky at the Apollo 12 landing. Again, you see that one of the three belt stars of Orion at 19.5 degrees above the landing site. And this stuff just kept falling out. Here's the Apollo 15 landing site. By the way, it's Falcon, not Flacken. And again, remember, Horus is the Falcon god. So you had a lunar module basically named Horus landing with Orion's belt star at 33 degrees above the landing site. Now, this seemed to us to be pretty improbable. There's been a study done that put it at, believe it or not, about 19.5 billion to 1 that all this stuff is coincidence. Marianne Weaver did this study. She's retracted it to some extent, but even if the odds were, let's say, 15 billion to 1 or 14 billion to 1, after she has her corrections, this stuff, people try to say that these alignments are common. They are not common. They are extraordinarily rare for you to be able to come up with this pattern. The Apollo 17 landing site, which Richard is going to go into extensively, was at 19.5 degrees north. So we keep seeing all these 19.5s, all these 33s, and they seem to be connected to this hyperdimensional physics concept. And again, here's the Apollo 17 a landing site sky. When they left the moon, when mankind left the moon for the last time, there was Orion, Osiris, right on the horizon, right in that sacred position to the Egyptians. Now, the ultimate test was to go back and look at Viking frame 35A72. And if there really was something to this, then there would be some sort of significant alignment over the face on Mars, we surmised. So Richard went back and he looked at the sky right above the face itself. I hope that's not snoring. Right above the face itself when they acquired that image. Okay, so you've got the Viking 1 probe orbiting Mars, and you've got the face down here. And at that moment, when they snapped that picture, you again had Orion's belt star, one of Orion's main belt stars, at 19.5 degrees, right above the face on Mars. So there seemed to be a real pattern to this stuff. Now, what we had to do eventually was say, okay, we have to come up with a system that's internally consistent, that we can repeat and that we can test and make predictions from. So what I did is put together a little chart of when we say we have an alignment or a hit, this is what we're talking about. In the Egyptian stellar religion, the horizon was extremely significant, and the meridian, which is the north-south line that goes over your head. These were the two most significant positions. In fact, Graham Hancock says that the Great Pyramid in Egypt, he considers it to be a meridian machine that was basically designed to observe things as they cross the meridian. To that, we've added 19.5 degrees and 33 degrees above and below the horizon, because we found, literally, I could, as dull as this might be, I could bore you to death with literally hundreds more examples from specific, significant NASA events where you had Sirius or Orion at 19.5 or 33 degrees above the horizon, below the horizon. I even went to Giza, the Great Pyramids, the oldest, most amazing place on Earth. And I ran the calendar back to the start of the Julian calendar, and there was Sirius at 33 degrees at the start of the Julian calendar. It's like Caesar literally went and said, okay, I've got to find an alignment. Okay, we'll start the calendar in 4745 BC or something. It was just bizarre. So wait a minute. So let me go back. So when people say that these alignments are common, you have to remember we have this is all we consider to be a hit. This 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, right? That's 5. So in other words, when you're talking about stellar altitude, 95% of the sky, 355 out of 360 degrees is off limits. Same way with the meridian, it's even more. It's like 98% of the sky is off limits. So when we talk about these alignments being significant, you have to understand that basically 95% of the time, if you just randomly look, you're probably not going to get a hit. Yet NASA keeps getting hits. So it turned out that basically everybody who was anybody at NASA was either a Freemason or, interestingly enough, a former Nazi, or there's even some more interesting guys over here at JPL. Now, this is the structure of NASA at the time of Apollo. You had James Webb, who was a Scottish Rite Freemason as a director. You had Ken Kleinknecht, who was running Mercury, Gemini, and the Apollo Command and Service Module program. Below him were the astronauts like Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell, Wally Schirra, Donald Isley, Gus Grissom. Hubertus Strughold was the director of space medicine for NACA, which was a precursor to NASA. And it's interesting that there's a character named Strughold in the X-Files movie. I thought that was always really cool, but they went back and dug that out. Now, there's one guy I left off of this, because in order to pull this off, what you would have to do is you would have to know, you'd have to be able to pick the landing sites. You have to be able to convince them to land in the right place at the right time. So it turns out that the guy who picked all of the Apollo landing sites was named Farouk Elbaz, Dr. Farouk Elbaz, who was, guess what, an Egyptian, who was, guess what, the son of an Egyptian scholar who specialized in, guess what, the ancient Egyptian stellar religions that dealt with Isis and Osiris and Horus and Set. He picked every landing site, every date, and every time. Now again, it's like Richard talked about earlier, it's important to understand when you just say to yourself, we're going to go to the moon. You don't say, okay, well, we're going to launch on Tuesday and we're going to get there on Friday and we're going to land and we're going to do this. What you do is you start with, okay, when and where are we going to land first? And then you work your way backwards. So all the landing sites were picked, and using various equipment, they would have been able to say to themselves, well, the stars are going to be right at this particular time, so let's pick that date and that time, and that's where we'll put the spacecraft down. Okay, the German aspect to this, the Nazi aspect, started to get really kind of interesting about this time, because what we started to do was look at things like the Surveyor 3 landing. Apollo 12 and Surveyor 3 landed in virtually the same place on the moon, about 30 months apart. It was, there was a mission there on Apollo 12 where they went down and they actually cut off the camera mast and brought it back and stuff to Earth of the Surveyor 3 probe. But what turns out that when Surveyor 3 landed, the moon was at 33 degrees above the horizon of JPL. Now, JPL controlled the Surveyor 3 program. The other thing that was interesting was the date. It was April 20th, 1967, which happens to be Adolf Hitler's birthday. So here is one of the astronauts. I think this would be Al Bean at the Surveyor 3 landing site. There's the LEM in the background. They landed literally right in the same place. And I think what consecrated this temple was the fact that they landed on the moon on Hitler's birthday. Here he is with Surveyor 3. And they took a few pictures. The camera was broken. They set the color camera on the second Apollo mission, Apollo 12, but they pointed it into the sun and burned it out, which, as Richard will show you later, there was a real good reason why they did that. Now, it also turns out that they were pretty overt about some of the other stuff they did. There was Apollo 16, and Apollo 16's lunar module was named Orion, basically flat out named Osiris. Now, when it landed on the moon, and there was Sirius, the consort of Osiris, again, 33 degrees below the horizon. But also, that happened to be on April 20th, 1972. So they landed twice on the moon on Adolf Hitler's birthday. Now, why would anybody do that? Well, it turns out, guess what? In a book, this is a book by Nicholas Goodrick Clark that he's been on, if you ever watch the History Channel, the H Channel I call it, all Hitler all the time, where they basically show all these NASA, all these occult conspiracies. Yeah, the H Channel, all Hitler all the time. Sorry.